You never forget the first time someone tells you you're not enough. Not in a quiet, private way, but in a room full of people who are supposed to be your peers. My name is Samantha Reed, and if you'd asked me a year ago, I would have told you I was on track. I was the operations manager at a fast-growing tech company, the one who kept the wheels turning, the one who made sure nothing fell through the cracks. I was the person people came to when they needed a problem solved, a deadline met, or a crisis averted. I thought I was respected. I thought I was valued. But all it took was one meeting, one sentence, to make me question everything I thought I knew about myself and about the people I worked with. It was a Monday morning, the kind that starts with a triple espresso and a to-do list that never seems to end. I'd spent the weekend prepping for the quarterly strategy session, running numbers, building slides, and rehearsing my pitch. I knew the business inside out. I knew where we were strong, where we were vulnerable, and what we needed to do to get to the next level. I was ready. Or so I thought. The boardroom was already buzzing when I walked in. The executive team was there, finance, marketing, product, and HR. And at the head of the table, as always, was Mark. Mark, with his tailored suit and his easy smile, was the kind of man who never seemed to break a sweat. He'd been the COO for 3 years, and he made sure everyone knew it. I took my seat, laptop open, heart steady. I'd done this before. Mark started the meeting with his usual charm. Jokes, small talk, and a few stories about his weekend on the golf course. Then he turned to me. "Sam, why don't you walk us through your plan?" I stood, clicked to the first slide, and began. The room quieted. I explained the numbers, the risks, and the opportunities. I highlighted the wins, owned the losses, and laid out a plan for the next quarter. I could feel the energy in the room shift. People were nodding, taking notes, and asking questions. I was in my element. And then Mark cut me off. "That's all very thorough, Sam," he said, his voice smooth as glass. "But I have to ask, do you really see yourself leading this team? I mean, you're great at the details, but leadership is about vision, about presence. I'm not sure you're quite there yet." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. I felt every eye in the room turn to me, then to him, then back to me. Mark smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Don't take it personally. Some people are just better suited to supporting roles." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stared at him, willing myself not to blink, not to flinch, and not to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. My colleagues looked at their laptops, their notes, anywhere but at me. Silence, like a verdict. Mark kept talking, something about organizational realignment and leveraging core competencies, but I didn't hear it. All I heard was the blood rushing in my ears and the sound of my own heartbeat, loud and furious. I wanted to scream, to throw my coffee in his face, to walk out and never look back. But I didn't. I just nodded, gathered my things, and left the room. I made it to the stairwell before the tears came. Not big, dramatic sobs, just a few hot, angry drops that I wiped away with the back of my hand. I took the stairs down, 1 flight, 2, 3, until I found myself in the lobby staring at the marble floor, the security desk, and the revolving doors. I'd walked through those doors every day for almost 6 years. I'd built my career in that building, brick by brick. Late nights and early mornings, missed birthdays and canceled vacations. And now, just like that, I was being told I wasn't leadership material. I called my best friend Jess. She answered on the first ring. "Sam? What's wrong?" I tried to keep my voice steady. He said, "I'm not leadership material." In front of everyone. There was a pause. Then, quietly, "Are you kidding me?" I wanted to say something brave, something defiant, but all I could manage was, "I don't know what to do." She didn't offer advice. She just listened, the way she always did. When I finally hung up, I felt a little steadier. Not strong, not yet, but steady enough to walk back upstairs, pack up my things, and face the music. The next few days were a blur. Meetings, emails, awkward conversations in the break room, People avoided my gaze, whispered in the hallways, and sent me LinkedIn requests with vague messages about staying in touch. I smiled, nodded, and played the part. But inside, I was burning. I spent the weekend in my apartment, blinds drawn, phone off, replaying the scene in my head. The humiliation, the betrayal, the way Mark had looked at me, like I was nothing, like I was already gone. I thought about quitting, about moving to another city, starting over somewhere no one knew my name. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Not just at Mark, but at myself, for letting him do this to me, for letting him win.
By Sunday night, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to fight. But not the way he expected. Not with angry emails or HR complaints or desperate pleas for my old job back. No, I was going to play his game, and I was going to win. I started with what I knew best, the numbers. If Mark wanted to question my vision, I'd show him a vision built on facts, not just bravado. I spent the next week arriving early and staying late, combing through every report, every project, and every metric that mattered to the board. I mapped out where the company was bleeding money, where we were missing opportunities, and where the so-called leadership had been coasting on old wins. I built a case so airtight it could have survived a hurricane. But I knew numbers alone wouldn't be enough. Mark was a master of perception, and perception was everything in that boardroom. So I started talking to people, quietly, carefully, listening more than I spoke. I asked the engineers what was slowing them down, the sales team what deals were falling through, and the customer service reps what complaints kept them up at night. I took notes, asked follow-up questions, and made sure everyone knew I was listening. For the first time in months, people started opening up. They told me things they'd never say in a meeting, things they were afraid to put in writing. I realized that the real problems weren't just in the spreadsheets. They were in the culture, in the way people felt ignored, dismissed, and undervalued. I started to see a pattern. Mark's leadership style, top-down, dismissive, and all about control, wasn't just stifling me. It was stifling everyone. People were afraid to take risks, to speak up, and to challenge the status quo. The company was stuck, not because we lacked talent, but because we lacked trust. I knew I had to do something bold, so I started building alliances. I reached out to a few key players, people with influence, people who were respected, and people who had quietly supported me over the years. I shared my findings, asked for their input, and invited them to help me craft a new vision for the company. It wasn't about me. It was about us, about what we could build together if we stopped letting fear and ego run the show. The response was overwhelming. People were hungry for change, for a chance to be heard, for a leader who actually listened. We started meeting after hours, brainstorming ideas, and mapping out a plan. It felt risky, even a little dangerous, but it also felt right. For the first time since that awful Monday, I felt hope. Meanwhile, Mark seemed oblivious. He strutted through the office, basking in his own authority, making decisions without consulting anyone, dismissing concerns with a wave of his hand. But I could see the cracks forming. People were starting to push back, subtly at first, then more openly. Questions were being asked in meetings, data was being challenged, and Mark's answers were getting thinner by the day. I knew the board meeting was coming up in 3 weeks. That was my window. I spent every spare moment refining my presentation, gathering testimonials, and rehearsing my pitch. I wanted to walk into that room not just with a plan, but with a movement behind me. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. I paced my apartment, running through every scenario. What if Mark tried to shut me down again? What if the board sided with him? What if I lost everything? But then I remembered the faces of the people who'd confided in me, the quiet courage it took for them to speak up. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for all of us. The morning of the meeting, I dressed with intention. Navy suit, crisp white shirt, and the necklace my grandmother had given me when I got my first promotion. I walked into the boardroom with my head high, my heart steady, and my plan ready. Mark opened the meeting with his usual routine, but this time I didn't let him set the tone. When it was my turn, I stood up, looked every board member in the eye, and spoke from the heart. I laid out the numbers, yes, but I also told the stories, the missed opportunities, the silenced voices, and the ideas that had died on the vine because no one felt safe enough to share them. I talked about what real leadership looked like. Not just vision, but empathy. Not just authority, but accountability. I could feel the room shift. People leaned in, took notes, and asked questions. Mark tried to interrupt, but this time I didn't let him. I answered every challenge with facts, every doubt with data, and every dismissal with a story that made the numbers real. When I finished, the room was silent. Then one by one, the board members started to speak. They asked hard questions, but they listened. They challenged my assumptions, but they respected my answers. For the first time, I felt like I was being seen, not just as a detail person, but as a leader. After the meeting, Mark pulled me aside. His smile was gone, replaced by something colder. "You think you can just waltz in here and take over? You're not ready for this, Sam."
I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. Maybe not, but I'm not afraid to try. The days after the board meeting felt like walking a tightrope. I could sense the tension in the air, the way conversations paused when I entered a room, and the way people watched Mark and me with a new kind of curiosity. Some colleagues congratulated me quietly, with a hand on my shoulder or a quick nod in the hallway. Others kept their distance, unsure which way the wind was blowing. I understood. In corporate life, loyalty is often a matter of survival. Mark, for his part, was rattled. He started calling more meetings, sending out long-winded emails, and micromanaging projects he'd barely glanced at before. It was as if he was trying to reassert his dominance, to remind everyone who was in charge. But the more he pushed, the more people pushed back. The team had tasted what it felt like to be heard, and they weren't willing to go back to silence. I kept my head down and focused on the work. I met with my allies regularly, refining our proposals, gathering more feedback, and making sure our ideas were bulletproof. We started piloting small changes, new workflows, open brainstorming sessions, and even a weekly voice of the team meeting where anyone could share ideas or concerns. The results were immediate. Productivity went up, morale improved, and people started volunteering for projects instead of waiting to be assigned. But I knew Mark wouldn't give up easily. One afternoon, he called me into his office. The blinds were drawn, the air heavy with the scent of his cologne. He gestured for me to sit, then leaned forward, his eyes hard. "Sam, I know what you're doing. You think you can rally the team and impress the board, but you're out of your depth. Leadership isn't about making friends. It's about making tough calls. You're not cut out for it." I let his words hang in the air, refusing to let them sting. I'd heard them before, in different forms, from different mouths, but this time I saw them for what they were: fear. Mark was afraid of losing control, afraid of being exposed, and afraid that someone he'd dismissed could actually succeed. I stood up, calm and steady. "Leadership is about trust, Mark, and right now, you don't have it. The team deserves better. The company deserves better." He scoffed, waving me off. "You'll regret this." But I didn't. If anything, his threat made me more determined. I left his office with my resolve hardened, my vision clearer than ever. That week, I got a call from one of the board members, a woman named Evelyn. She'd been quiet during the meeting, but now she wanted to talk. We met for coffee at a little cafe near the office, away from prying eyes. "I've been watching you, Sam," she said, stirring her tea. "You remind me of myself when I started out. Hungry, smart, and a little too honest for your own good. Don't let them change you. The board is divided right now, but if you keep showing results, you'll win them over."
Her words were a lifeline. I thanked her, promising not to back down. As I walked back to the office, I felt a new sense of purpose. I wasn't just fighting for a promotion or a title. I was fighting for a new way of leading, one that valued people as much as profits. The next board meeting was scheduled for the end of the quarter. I knew it would be my real test. Mark would come prepared, and so would I. I doubled down on my efforts, working with my team to deliver results that couldn't be ignored. We landed a major client, streamlined a key process, and launched a new product feature ahead of schedule. Every win was a brick in the foundation I was building, one that couldn't be knocked down by a single person's opinion. As the meeting approached, I felt the familiar nerves, but this time they were mixed with excitement. I was ready. I had the numbers, the stories, and the support. I had a vision, and more importantly, I had a team that believed in it. The night before the meeting, Jess called. "You've got this, Sam. No matter what happens, you've already changed things. Don't let anyone take that away from you." I smiled, feeling the truth in her words. I wasn't the same person who'd walked out of that boardroom in tears. I was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. The morning of the meeting, I stood in front of the mirror, straightened my suit, and took a deep breath. "You are enough," I whispered to my reflection. "You always were."
The boardroom was brighter than usual, sunlight streaming through the windows and glinting off the polished table. I took my seat, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. Mark was already there, his expression unreadable, a stack of papers in front of him like a shield. The rest of the board filtered in, some nodding to me, others keeping their faces carefully neutral. Evelyn caught my eye and gave me the smallest of smiles, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone. The meeting began with the usual formalities, but there was an undercurrent of tension, a sense that something important was about to happen. Mark launched into his report, painting a picture of steady progress and strong leadership. He glossed over the challenges, spun the numbers, and made sure to mention every minor win as if it were a major triumph. It was a performance, and I could see some of the board members growing restless. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and connected my laptop to the projector. My hands were steady, my voice clear. I started with the facts: revenue growth, client wins, and improved retention. But then I shifted gears. I talked about the changes we'd made as a team, the new ideas that had come from the people closest to the work, the risks we'd taken, and the lessons we'd learned. I shared testimonials from team members, stories of small innovations that had led to big results, and data that showed not just what we'd achieved, but how we'd achieved it. I could see the mood in the room shift. Board members leaned in, asked questions, and challenged my assumptions. I welcomed every question, every doubt, and every pushback. I wanted them to see that leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about creating an environment where the best answers could emerge. Mark tried to interrupt, to poke holes in my analysis, but this time the board pushed back. Evelyn spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "We've seen more progress in the last quarter than we have in the last year. That's not a coincidence." Another board member, a man who'd always seemed skeptical of me, nodded. "The numbers speak for themselves, but so does the morale. I've heard from people across the company. They feel heard and they feel valued. That matters." Mark's face tightened, but he said nothing. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. The meeting stretched on, but by the end, the outcome was clear. The board thanked me for my leadership, for my vision, and for my willingness to challenge the status quo. They asked me to stay behind after the meeting, along with Mark. When the room cleared, the chair of the board turned to us. "We've been reviewing the company's direction, and it's clear we need a change. Mark, we appreciate your service, but it's time for new leadership. Sam, we'd like you to step in as interim COO while we conduct a formal search. Are you willing?" For a moment, I was stunned. I glanced at Mark, who looked as if he'd been punched.
Then I looked at Evelyn, who gave me a nod of encouragement. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I'm ready." Mark gathered his things in silence and left the room. I watched him go, feeling a mix of relief, sadness, and vindication. I hadn't set out to take his job. I'd set out to prove I was worthy of leading. But in the end, the work had spoken for itself. The days that followed were a whirlwind. There were announcements, meetings, and a flood of emails from colleagues across the company. Some congratulated me, others offered cautious support, and a few even apologized for not standing up for me sooner. I accepted it all with gratitude, knowing that real change takes time. I met with every team, listened to their concerns, and made it clear that my door was always open. I encouraged open dialogue, celebrated small wins, and made sure credit was given where it was due. The energy in the company shifted. People were more engaged, more creative, and more willing to take risks. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I ran into Jess in the lobby. She hugged me tight, her eyes shining. "You did it, Sam. You really did it." I smiled, feeling the truth of her words settle in my chest.
I had taken over the boardroom, not with force, but with vision, with empathy, with the quiet strength that comes from knowing who you are.